This was one of the last known photos taken of rapper XXXTentacion, moments before he was fatally shot during a robbery outside a Florida motorcycle dealership in June of 2018. Investigators determined it was not a targeted hit job, but a robbery gone wrong after suspects spotted his luxury vehicle and expensive Louis Vuitton bag. Released surveillance footage showed two gunmen approaching his car, demanding the bag and opening fire when he resisted. The 20-year-old artist, born Jose Onfroy, was shot multiple times at close range and died shortly after at a nearby hospital. In 2023, 3 men were convicted of his first-degree murder and armed robbery. Beatriz Flamini spent 500 days completely alone inside a cave nearly 230 feet underground, cut off from sunlight, clocks, and all human contact as part of an experiment on extreme isolation. She entered the cave in November of 2021 and did not emerge until April of 2023, with no communication with the outside world during that time. Scientists monitoring her remotely had found that her circadian rhythm had completely collapsed, with severe sleep disruption, memory lapses, and slowed cognition developing over time. Flamini later described moments of mental detachment and sensory distortion, and when she finally resurfaced, she genuinely believed she'd only been underground for about 160 days, illustrating how prolonged isolation can fundamentally fracture the brain's sense of time and reality. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. This was the moment all hell broke loose at the 1981 Indy 500. During a routine pit stop, methanol fuel ignited after a malfunction, instantly surrounding the area in flames. But unlike gasoline, methanol burns almost completely invisible in daylight, leaving drivers, crew members, and officials with no clear indication they were standing in a fire. Marshals scrambled to extinguish the blaze, but had no way of knowing where the flames were. Several people suffered serious burns before the fire was fully extinguished. The incident exposed the extreme danger of invisible fuel fires and led to major changes in fire safety protocols in motorsports. Here's a terrifying clip of a Ukrainian soldier showing symptoms of rabies. Throughout the video, he tries to drink water but physically can't. This reaction is called hydrophobia, one of the clearest signs that rabies has reached the brain. Rabies is one of the deadliest diseases known. If treated immediately after exposure before symptoms appear, it's almost always preventable. But once symptoms like difficulty swallowing, confusion, or agitation begin, the virus has already caused significant neurological damage. At this stage, survival is so rare that statistically, a person has a better chance of surviving a gunshot wound to the head than surviving symptomatic rabies. There's no proven cure, and death is usually inevitable once symptoms appear. Brendan Fraser's brief collapse was driven by years of physical destruction, psychological breakdown, and what many believe was a Hollywood blacklist. At the height of his career, he was performing nearly all of his own stunts, which led to multiple herniated discs, spinal compression, a fractured pelvis, and repeated surgeries that left him in constant pain. In 1999, Fraser nearly died during the filming of The Mummy when a hanging stunt went horribly wrong and the rope was pulled too tightly, cutting off blood flow to his brain and causing him to lose consciousness. He later said doctors told him he came dangerously close to serious brain injury or death. Around the same time, he endured the passing of his mother, a financially devastating divorce, and severe depression. Brendan later alleged he was sexually assaulted by a powerful Hollywood executive in 2003, and after speaking about it privately, his career abruptly stalled. Many believe he was quietly blacklisted as major roles vanished almost overnight, leaving him to describe himself as invisible for years while living in pain and isolation. After roughly a 15-year hiatus, hiatus, Fraser ultimately rebuilt his life and career, returning to Hollywood on his own terms and finding renewed stability and appreciation from fans. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence. In October of 2011, famed narrator David Attenborough found a skull in the garden of his London property. He immediately informed police, who later determined the skull belonged to the victim of a gruesome murder during the Victorian era. Julia Martha Thomas was killed by her housemaid in 1879 before being chopped up, boiled, and fed to local children. There's a room in the basement of Oregon State Hospital known today as the Room of Forgotten Souls. In 2004, hundreds of copper cans were discovered holding the remains of 3,600 mental patients who were cremated on site starting in 1917. Built in 1628, the Swedish warship Vasa was hailed as the greatest warship ever built, but infamously sank just 20 minutes into its maiden voyage, resulting in the deaths of at least 30 people. After it was salvaged in 1961, archaeologists found that the ship was horribly asymmetrical. Apparently, some of the builders had measured in Swedish feet, which was 12 inches, while others had measured in Amsterdam feet, which was 11 inches. The ship was knocked over by a mild gust of wind less than a mile into its voyage. Diddy's former dancer, Adria English, has spilled some serious tea about the notorious rapper, and the details are beyond disturbing. English was a go-go dancer for Diddy and was stationed at certain checkpoints at his freak-off parties. She claims she was used by Diddy to help set people up for blackmail. Here are her most disturbing claims from a recent interview, which get worse as the list goes on. And to be very clear, these are all just allegations that haven't yet been confirmed. Diddy refused to let a young dancer use the bathroom during one of his parties, so she just went number 2 on stage. Guest Denzel Washington watched this happen and stormed out of the party in pure disgust. Diddy once had a threesome with rapper Nelly and an unnamed underage girl. In the leaked photos of Diddy eating fruit off of a woman, she was actually 14 years old. An underage girl Diddy sexually abused had 2 of his children, and he helped deliver the babies at his own residence. At one party, Diddy made J-Lo stick a bottle in the private area of an 11-year-old girl. Diddy's 2 sons, Justin and Christian Combs, ran a train on Justin Bieber while he was tied down and sobbing. A young girl who witnessed this happening is part of the lawsuit against Diddy. The rapper apparently slapped her when she tried to loosen the straps on Bieber. An X-ray revealed that a 300-year-old Mexican statue of Jesus has real human teeth. They're believed to have been donated by worshippers as a way to get closer to the religious figure. After killing his girlfriend with a hatchet, 30-year-old Philadelphia man William Kemmler became the first person to be executed by electric chair. While it was supposed to demonstrate the effectiveness and humanity of electrocution, the punishment went horribly wrong. They underestimated the amount of electricity needed to quickly and painlessly end a man's life, so Kemmler was still conscious after the first shock. When physicians noticed he was still breathing in agony, they hit him with a second shock that was more powerful, causing his entire body to convulse violently and start smoking. Kemmler ended up with bubbling skin, melted eyes, and a foaming mouth, and the entire room reeked of burning flesh as many spectators ended up passing out from the horror. But despite this, the electric chair would still continue to be used for more than 100 years afterwards. Wonder Woman was created by a polyamorous male kinkster who was married to 2 bisexual women. The character was originally made to represent an overtly kinky sex symbol for women, and was nearly cancelled from the start because of how explicitly she was being depicted. The throuple was also heavily into bondage, which supposedly inspired Wonder Woman's rope. Edgar Allan Poe married his first cousin Virginia when she was 13 years old and he was 27. The pair first met when Virginia was only 7 while Edgar was 21. Former Vice President Nelson Rockefeller suffered a heart attack and died while having intercourse with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70 years old at the time. Most famous for his 6 different marriages, King Henry VIII hired 4 men to regularly check his feces, monitor his bowel movements, and wipe his bottom. They were known as the grooms of the King's Stool, and all of them were eventually knighted. 1999, 23-year-old Fan Man Yi of Hong Kong was kidnapped by a loan shark and 2 accomplices after stealing a small sum of money. For over a month, she was held captive in a Sim Sha Sui apartment, where she was beaten with metal bars, burned with melted plastic, forced to smile through torture, and subjected to humiliating commands until she finally died from her injuries. Her killers then dismembered her body, boiling the remains, and sewing her skull into a large Hello Kitty mermaid doll. The crime only came to light when a teenage accomplice confessed, claiming she was being haunted by Fan's ghost, leading police to one of the most horrifying discoveries in Hong Kong's history. Vanilli became global pop stars in the late 80s, winning a Grammy with hits like Girl You Know It's True. But in 1990, it was exposed that the duo had never sung a single note on their own records or during live shows. They were always lip-syncing to tracks recorded by studio singers. Their Grammy was revoked, albums were pulled from stores, and the scandal became one of the most infamous frauds in music history. Belle Gibson built a global wellness brand by claiming she had cured her terminal brain cancer through diet and natural remedies. But in 2015, journalists revealed she never actually had cancer at all and also lied about donating to charity. The scam made her millions but ended in total disgrace. She was fined 400,000 Australian dollars for misleading customers, and her wellness empire completely collapsed. In the early 2000s, Rudy Kurniawan became one of the world's top rare wine sellers, moving millions of dollars worth of supposedly priceless bottles to elite collectors. But behind the scenes, he was running the biggest wine fraud in modern history. Rudy refilled bottles with cheap blends, forged labels, and even used UV light to adjust his fakes so that they'd fool collectors' authentication tools. In 2012, the FBI raided his home and found an entire wine forgery lab, stacks of empty bottles, fake labels, corking machines, and a massive stockpile of cheap wine. In 2014, Rudy was sentenced to 10 years in prison in order to repay all $28.4 million. But to this day, some of his fakes are still sitting undiscovered in the world's finest wine collections. Cyclopia is a real congenital disorder marked by the failure of the embryo to properly divide the orbits of the eyes into 2 separate cavities, resulting in a single eye in the middle of the face. It's usually caused by a mutation in the Sonic the Hedgehog gene, real, and typically results in death within a few hours after birth. The tragic condition occurs in 1 out of every 200 miscarried fetuses, and the maximum recorded lifespan of a child born with cyclopia is 1 day. Following the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, people have been putting up wanted posters across New York City targeting other healthcare CEOs. The posters read, "Healthcare CEOs should not feel safe," after his 28-year-old teacher allegedly made creepy remarks to a 6th grade girl. A young student catfished the man and made him think he was talking to a 14-year-old girl. After receiving concerning messages from the teacher, the boy reported him to police, and he now faces charges of sexual exploitation. On June 18, 2011, Amy Winehouse took the stage in Belgrade for what would become her final major performance and one of the most painful nights of her career. She stumbled through songs, slurred her words, and forgot entire lyrics as the crowd began to boo. Serbian media called it a national embarrassment, and even government officials described the show as a disgrace. Within days, the rest of her European tour was canceled so she could recover, but she never did. Just over a month later, on July 23, 2011, Amy was found dead in her London home from alcohol poisoning at the young age of 27. Elsa Koch, wife of Buchenwald commandant Karl Otto Koch, became infamous for her sadism towards prisoners during the Holocaust. Survivors claimed she ordered beatings, stole from inmates, and selected those with distinctive tattoos to be killed so their skin could be turned into lampshades, book covers, and gloves. Nicknamed the Bitch of Buchenwald, she was convicted of war crimes, sentenced to life in prison, and died of suicide in 1967. Her name forever tied to some of the most grotesque atrocities of the Nazi regime. Her husband's disgusting secret drove her insane, and what she did next was pure horror. In 2020, 59-year-old Corinna Smith from Cheshire, England, learned that her husband Michael Baines had allegedly been sexually abusing their children for years. Enraged and unable to sleep, she boiled a pot of water, stirred in 3 bags of sugar to make it thicker and stickier, then poured the scalding mixture over him as he lay in bed. The sugar turned the water into a syrup that clung to his skin, causing burns so deep they exposed his flesh. Baines screamed in agony and survived for 5 excruciating coming weeks before succumbing to his injuries. Smith later told police she simply lost control after finding out what he'd done. She was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 12 years. Ariana Grande's life has been marked by unimaginable tragedy. In 2017, during her concert at Manchester Arena, a suicide bomber set off an explosive as fans were leaving the show. 22 people were killed, some of them children, and hundreds more were injured. The tragedy left Ariana with PTSD and deep survivor's guilt, something she said she'll never fully recover from. Just a year later, she lost her ex-boyfriend Mac Miller to an overdose, a loss that left her completely shattered. In 2019, she revealed how deeply those experiences affected her, sharing a brain scan that showed severe patterns of trauma, comparing it to a healthy brain and one with PTSD. Hers lit up the same way as the trauma scan, as she called it hilarious and terrifying, not a joke. In the years since, fans have noticed a drastic change in her appearance. Her once soft features now look sharper and hollowed, her frame thinner, her face at times hauntingly fragile. Whether from stress, age, or the weight of everything she's endured, Ariana's transformation feels like a visible reminder of how much she's had to carry. This was the moment when a quiet shopping afternoon at a California mall erupted into chaos, as roughly 25 masked intruders stormed a jewelry store in San Ramon in September of 2025. Surveillance footage shows the group rushing in almost simultaneously, smashing glass display cases with crowbars as customers and employees scrambled for safety. The entire robbery unfolded in less than 2 minutes, with suspects scooping up over $1 million in jewelry. When security doors partially locked, trapping some of them inside, at least one suspect fired a gun at the door to force an escape. The group then scattered into multiple waiting vehicles, several later confirmed stolen, triggering a nationwide police response and pursuit. Investigators described the robbery as highly coordinated and pre-planned, with roles assigned and several lookouts positioned outside, and said it mirrored a growing wave of increasingly aggressive mob-style jewelry heists in the area. Several suspects were arrested in the days that followed, facing robbery, conspiracy, and weapons charges, but authorities say most of the suspects involved in the coordinated heist remain at large. This is the harrowing skull of a man with Proteus syndrome, a rare and awful condition characterized by the overgrowth of skin, organs, tissues, and bones. Nikola Tesla originally expected to live to the age of 150, but later lowered this estimate to 135 years when he was forced to give up alcohol due to prohibition. He thought that consuming alcohol was good for the body and was a heavy drinker as a result. Tesla ended up dying at the age of 86. When revolutionary hero Guy Fawkes was convicted of high treason in 1605, his punishment was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, meaning he would be hanged almost to the point of death, have his intestines and sex organs removed while still alive, decapitated, and have his limbs torn off. After the sentencing, Fawkes said "fuck that" and leapt from the gallows so that the rope broke his neck and killed him immediately. The drawing and quartering was still performed on his corpse, and his body parts were paraded around London. YouTube prankster Vitaly rose to fame in the early 2010s for viral public stunts built around shock, confrontation, and pushing social boundaries. But as his platform grew, those stunts increasingly crossed into real-world violence. In 2014, he was arrested in Miami after physically attacking a woman in what he called a prank. Years later, Vitaly admitted he was high on psychedelic mushrooms when he punched another woman in the face, a completely unprovoked assault that left her with serious facial injuries requiring hospitalization. In 2016, he escalated further by carrying out a bomb hoax at LAX that caused mass panic and resulted in criminal convictions. In 2022, he was detained again after running onto the field during the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, interrupting a live international match and being forcibly removed by security. Afterward, Vitaly's behavior only continued to deteriorate, culminating in his arrest in the Philippines in April of 2025 after a series of live-streamed incidents in Manila where he was filmed harassing mall security guards, confronting random civilians, trespassing on private property, and allegedly stealing a security guard's phone during an altercation. Philippine authorities classified the conduct as harassment, theft, and public disorder, charging him with various offenses including unjust vexation. He's currently detained at a jail facility in Taguig while awaiting trial, and has not been deported after both the United States and Russia declined to accept him. Vitaly has already spent around 8 months in pretrial detention, and if convicted, he faces up to 18 months in a Philippine prison, following a steady escalation from viral stunts to criminal charges. In 2015, Florida mother Melanie Joyce Alexander was arrested after her 11-year-old daughter walked into school wearing a t-shirt basically exposing everything happening at home, and she had the bruises to prove it. The shirt declared she'd gotten a good whooping for bad grades, but teachers immediately noticed belt-shaped welts across her arms, legs, and lower back. Investigators say Melanie forced her to wear the shirt so the entire school would see why she'd been beaten, turning the punishment into a mix of public humiliation and physical abuse. The child was taken into protective custody, and Melanie was charged with felony child abuse, a case that went viral because the t-shirt meant to shame the girl ended up exposing the mother's crimes instead. Walter Francis White was a black civil rights investigator who looked completely white, and he used that to slip into some of the most dangerous places during the Jim Crow era. He infiltrated lynch mobs, KKK meetings, and towns still soaked in violence after a killing, quietly collecting names, methods, and first-hand accounts from men who had no idea they were talking to an NAACP investigator. His cover was blown on various occasions, forcing him to flee as armed mobs put a bounty on his head, and he later said he only survived by outrunning men who fully intended to hang him. The reports he gathered remain some of the most detailed records of lynching in American history, documenting crimes most officials refuse to even acknowledge. This 2,000-year-old mummy shows astonishing precision in the linen wrapping around its head, layered so neatly it looks machine-woven rather than done by hand. The unique artifact is the only mummy housed in the Louvre Museum, offering an incredible glimpse into how carefully the ancient Egyptians prepared their dead for eternity. When this Roman mosaic was unearthed in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists realized it had survived an earthquake without cracking, the waves of stone still perfectly frozen in the moment the earth vibrated beneath it. The horse-drawn omnibus of the 1890s was once the most reliable form of transport in city streets. Crowded with strangers and pulled by exhausted animals, it clattered over cobblestones long before the first car horn ever sounded. Czech photographer Miroslav Tichy built his cameras out of trash, cardboard tubes, tin cans, and bits of string. The crude lenses produced blurry, distorted images that looked damaged or decayed, yet he embraced the flaws. Between the 60s and 80s, he took thousands of photos of women in his hometown, turning obsession, imperfection, and voyeurism into an unsettling form of art. Sweden once let the public crawl inside the world's only taxidermied blue whale, a 19th century relic preserved at the Natural History Museum in Gothenburg. Built in 1865, the exhibit was so massive that visitors could walk through its body to view a small museum inside. But in the 1970s, public access was abruptly ended when a couple was reportedly caught having intercourse inside the whale's belly. In 2017, Tennessee doctor Paul Locus was celebrating Halloween dressed as the Joker when he got an emergency call that one of his patients was in labor. Still wearing full makeup, green hair, and a purple suit, he rushed straight to the hospital to deliver the baby. The mother later said she couldn't stop laughing as her baby entered the world in the hands of a Batman villain. Here's a photo of a Turkish soldier whose face was severely disfigured by artillery fire during the Battle of Gallipoli in World War I. He likely didn't survive long enough for any meaningful reconstruction to be attempted. In the 1830s, Spanish-born criminal Diogo Alves terrorized Lisbon by robbing travelers on the city's aqueducts and throwing dozens to their deaths below, earning him the nickname the Aqueduct Murderer. After later killing a wealthy family during a botched robbery, he was caught and hanged in 1841. Scientists then severed his head and preserved it in formaldehyde for study, where it still sits on display at the University of Lisbon, eerily intact nearly 2 centuries later. This is one of the rarest events in nature a human can lay their eyes on. An atmospheric phenomenon known as a sun candle or light pillar forming at full intensity. The column forms when sunlight reflects off of flat ice crystals suspended in calm, freezing air, stacking the light into a heavenly beam stretching to the ground. Conditions have to be absolutely perfect, and most sun candles are often faint or brief. This one is unusually bright, tall, and sharply defined, making it a once-in-a-lifetime sight for skiers and snowboarders. This video shows one of the rarest congenital conditions ever documented in dogs, short spine syndrome. The disorder occurs when the spine fails to fully develop before birth, causing the body to appear unusually compressed while the legs remain close to normal length. Affected dogs often have little to no visible neck and a shortened, rigid back, though many can still walk and function completely normally. Fewer than a handful of confirmed cases have been documented worldwide, making it so rare that most veterinarians will never encounter one in their entire careers. This was the moment an Indonesian conservationist broke down in tears after finally witnessing one of the rarest flowers on Earth bloom. After searching the rainforests of Sumatra for 13 years, Diki Andriki and his team found a Rafflesia, a parasitic flower often nicknamed a corpse flower because it releases a powerful odor of rotting flesh to attract insects. The plant spends most of its life hidden inside a host vine and only blooms for a few days, making sightings incredibly rare as researchers never even see one in their lifetime. When the massive, foul-smelling flower began to open in front of him, the weight of more than a decade of dangerous jungle expeditions and failed searches finally hit. hit. This is one of the rarest atmospheric events ever caught on video. Upward lightning erupting from the summit of Volcán de Agua in Guatemala. The bolts appear to tear straight out of the volcano, making it look less like weather and more like something unnatural unfolding in real time. Unlike normal lightning that strikes downward from clouds, this phenomenon shoots upward from the ground into the storm above, triggered by intense electrical imbalance. It's so uncommon that storm chasers never even see it once in their lifetime, and it's almost never captured this clearly over a populated city. These were the wonky teeth that ultimately got Ted Bundy convicted. Before that moment, Bundy had already escaped custody twice in 1977 while awaiting trial in Colorado. During his first escape, he was allowed to act as his own attorney and therefore wasn't put in handcuffs, which gave him enough freedom to slip away from guards and jump from a courthouse window. After being recaptured, he engineered a second escape by deliberately starving himself, losing enough weight to squeeze through a small opening in the ceiling of his jail cell. That second escape took him all the way to Florida, where he apparently still couldn't resist his murderous urges. While hiding out in Tallahassee, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house and carried out a brutal attack on 4 young women, leaving 2 of them dead. One of the victims, 20-year-old Lisa Levy, was bitten deeply on the left butt cheek during the assault, leaving behind a clear dental impression. Unlike Bundy's earlier crimes, which were built largely on circumstantial evidence, the bite mark was matched to his unusually crooked teeth and served as the key piece of evidence that finally sealed his conviction as a serial killer. In 1985, veteran Miami Herald photographer Bob East went into surgery to remove a cancerous eyeball, but a tragic hospital mistake killed him instead. During the operation, doctors accidentally injected a toxic preservative chemical into his spine, thinking it was spinal fluid. The chemical, meant to preserve his removed eye, instantly caused brain damage, and East was declared brain dead soon after. He was eventually taken off of life support, while the hospital later admitted the mix-up and paid his family a $2 million settlement. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff in 1986, it didn't disintegrate immediately like many believe. The crew cabin actually remained intact. For nearly 3 agonizing minutes, it tumbled toward the Atlantic Ocean from a height of 50,000 feet. Investigators later found that air packs had been manually activated, suggesting that some of the 7 astronauts were still alive and possibly conscious during the entire fall. The cabin struck the ocean at over 200 miles per hour, killing everyone on impact. This is the facial reconstruction created from a severed human head found in an Illinois park in 1993, the only clue investigators had for nearly 3 decades. The victim remained unidentified until 2022, when DNA genealogy revealed she was Susan Lund, who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1992 after walking to a nearby store. Despite finally learning her name almost 30 years later, the rest of her body was never recovered. No suspect was ever charged, and her murder remains unsolved. This is a decorative tower filled with thousands of shaved human jawbone fragments, removed from patients during cosmetic jaw reduction surgeries in South Korea. The display came from a Sewol plastic surgery clinic, where the surgeon stacked discarded pieces of patients' faces into stacked columns to represent how many operations he had performed. The towers sparked public backlash and were later removed after authorities fined the clinic for violating medical waste laws requiring human remains to be incinerated. The case became a disturbing symbol of how normalized extreme facial alteration has become in South Korea, to the point that many patients have even reported being questioned at border control because their faces no longer match their passport photos. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she can no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail pile piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. This was the moment Icelandic singer Björk crashed out at Bangkok Airport in 1996, lunging at reporter Julie Kaufman and knocking her to the ground, moments after the reporter simply greeted her with the words, "Welcome to Bangkok." What appeared to be an explosive reaction to a harmless greeting was later explained by Björk as a breaking point. She claimed Kaufman had stalked her and her 9-year-old son for days across multiple locations, ignoring requests to stop. Björk said the airport encounter triggered fear for her child's safety. Kaufman denied any stalking, no charges were filed, and the footage became one of the most infamous celebrity confrontations of the 90s. On April 16, 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol capsized and sank off the coast of Jindo while carrying 476 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. An abrupt turn combined with overloaded cargo caused the ship to list and rapidly flood. Passengers were repeatedly told over the intercom to stay where they were. Instructions most of them followed as water quickly filled the decks. The captain and several crew members abandoned ship early, leaving hundreds trapped inside. The ferry sunk in roughly 2 hours, killing 304 people, the majority of them teenagers. The captain was convicted of gross negligence and murder by omission and sentenced to life in prison, while multiple crew members and shipping company officials received prison terms.